Hey, in this follow-up to our compost video, we'll dig a little deeper into our process and also our sources, and a little more about how these guys help turn all this waste into great soil. Hey, I'm out here in the compost piles to talk a little bit about how we use and make compost on Millsap Farm. We were inspired years ago to improve our soil because frankly what we have here in the Ozarks is it's a pretty rough version of soil, lots of clay, lots of rock. And for years we tried to do that mostly with the native soil, working within that matrix. And then several years back we listened to Ben Hartman, we're reading Elliot Coleman, and even J.M. Fortier. And what I saw with all these guys is they built their soil. Fascinating idea, right? It sounds expensive, it sounds difficult, and I'm not saying it's not, but on the other hand, so is weeding, so is irrigation, so is growing vegetables, right? So I think it really clicked for me when I heard Ben Hartman talking about growing in potting soil, and how the ideal thing, obviously, at least as a person who loves growing in greenhouses, the easiest place to grow plants is always in good deep potting soil, right? Whether that's in a tray or a pot or in a raised bed. Those are always the easiest conditions to grow things in. Weed free, moisture management, nutrient management, all that gets easier as the soil improves. And Hartman said, essentially, I am growing in a giant container. Now you think, well, that's expensive, and how could you build that much compost and spread it on that thick? I mean, he's talking about putting 8 to 10 inches of compost out in his first couple of years of growing. Well, the answer is it's expensive, but you get a yield that pays you back. And so in our case, it's taken us a few years to get to that point where we really were able to do that, or at least that we prioritized that. But I can tell you now, having done this deep compost system for in our longest lived beds about 5 years, the yields in those beds is so much higher. I mean, for example, in beds where we have not done this, we would probably plant 3 rows of carrots. That would be about max to get a quality carrot out of there. Part of that's nutrient levels, part of it's the difficulty of getting things out of the soil, a lot of pieces and parts to that. But in these deep bedded compost beds that have been sitting there for a couple of years and now mellowed out and have this super deep soil, it's no problem to put 5 or 6 rows of carrots in a 30-inch bed. That's a dramatic increase in yield. And so when we talk about adding compost, what I want to encourage you to think about is it's not about can I spread compost this widely. It's more about how deeply can I spread it, and then what can I grow in that'll pay the bills based on the increased yield and quality that I'm going to get out of this excellent soil. And so that's really the name of the game, is we're building excellent soil so that we can have excellent yields, so we can have excellent health in our soil, less runoff, better water management, better nutrient management, and just make our lives easier. One of the things that really changes when you start adding compost is your weed level. If you're making good compost, the compost doesn't have weeds in it. And so if you add 6 to 10 inches of compost to the top of your beds, you don't have weeds anymore. You'll have some perennial weeds that'll pop up, the dandelions and dock and things like that are going to pop up from down deep. But if that's all you have to deal with, that's really a pretty minor weed load, and you can handle that pretty easily with a hoe in a few minutes in each bed. And of course, eventually weeds do move in a little bit, but they're easy to manage with a tarp when all you have is a kind of a surface layer of maybe a few weed seeds here and there that have blown in. So we have found that those deep compost beds, the weed management is so much easier. And then of course harvest becomes a lot easier too on all your root crops, because now you're no longer digging carrots out. You can pull carrots out of some of our beds anymore. I mean, literally pull them out of the ground. Leeks are the same way. Leeks have these massive root systems. And so traditionally we had to dig all of our leeks with forks, but in these super deep compost beds, even though we're planting these leeks a foot deep and having this beautiful blanched shank, we'll still be able to pull them out of the ground with our bare hands. that kind of thing, it's hard to quantify exactly what that does for you, but I can tell you it makes life a lot better. So can you afford deep compost? I don't know. But do you want to do it? Yes, if you can, for sure. There's a lot of different ways to get there. You know, you could spread wood chips on 3 foot deep and wait several years. You can build compost piles like we're doing and stir the windrows and add materials. You could buy compost like that. My brother and sister-in-law down in Bentonville, Arkansas, are farming on what was a red clay and rock, essentially parking lot that had been graded off. And they added enough compost to grow beautiful vegetables. You know, yard waste compost bought from Springfield yard waste compost facility, but they've been able to apply it deep enough to grow beautiful vegetables in it. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, but I tell you, it's a cat worth skinning. So on our farm, the compost process is fairly straightforward. We bring in lots of different feedstocks. It includes wood chips from local chipper crews, fairgrounds bedding from the local fairground we haul in with a dump trailer, spent grains from White River Brewing Company, coffee grounds from several restaurants here in town, and we put those together in windrows. About 3 windrows in a typical season, and those windrows are 100 feet long, 12 feet wide, about 7 feet tall, and that's just the limitations of our machinery. We assemble that with a skid steer loader, which we trade vegetables for 5 days of skid steer use every quarter, and those windrows sit out in this kind of mixed state, pretty much left alone for about 3 months, and then they're going to move into the pigerator. And the pigerator is a term we borrowed from Joel Salatin. We're going to put this in as bedding for our pigs, and the pigs are going to dig through it, looking for scraps or interesting things, and just digging. They dig for the joy of digging. After they've been in there for a couple months, digging and manuring, taking all the scrap, weeds and kitchen scraps, all that sort of thing, leftover food from the farm stand, stuff that can't be sold, all that goes into the pigs. And they incorporate it into this compost mass. After it's been in there about 3 months, we scrape it out and we windrow it again, and it immediately heats up to about 130 degrees. Gets hot quick. In fact, it'll sometimes hit as high as 150. It's going to cool down over a period of about 2 months, and in that 3rd month, we're going to roll it either with our tractor or with a skid steer, and kind of just reconfigure the pile so that the outside gets to the inside gets to the outside. And that's when we start to notice it turning really black and get to turn this beautiful texture and color. And I love coming out in the morning, bringing my cup of tea, and watching the compost pile steam. It's a very satisfying feeling. Because what we're doing is we're building soil, right? We're doing what Mother Nature does over eons, and we're speeding up the process a little bit as stewards of this waste stream and turning it into this beautiful deep soil that's going to improve our soil, improve our land, and improve our crop yields. So then we take it, we roll it at least twice in those windrows after the pig pen, and what that's doing is killing pathogens and weed seeds. We're heating it up again to 130 degrees. The bacteria are doing that job for us. And then as it cools down for the final time, and now when we turn it, it's not warming up anymore, we know it's ready to go out on the fields. And that's when we're going to apply it on the fields. We're going to put it out there somewhere between 6 and 10 inches deep. We're going to stir in some organic fertilizers that we make here on the farm using some rock dust, some alfalfa pellets, and some sulfur to get the pH down a little bit. And then we're going to prep those beds as though we were going to plant into them, add wood chips to the paths, and then we're going to tarp over the whole thing. And we tarp over, now if we're ready to use them, we'll go ahead and plant directly, but oftentimes we're making these beds quite a bit in advance, and we're going to make sure they get good and wet, and then we're going to tarp them. And part of what's going on there is we are stabilizing the beds. The compost is compacting a little bit, so it's not quite so loose, so it holds water a little bit better. And also what we're doing is letting any weed seeds that might be in there germinate on top and die under that tarp. It gives the soil a nice chance to mellow and kind of let the worms come up into that compost. Lots of good things are happening under that tarp. And then we can pull back the tarp one row at a time and plant into that, one 30-inch bed at a time, and plant into it, start growing. And that's when we really see the benefit, right? Now we're getting beautiful crops, very few weeds, great water management, great nutrient management. Essentially, we're growing in what I like to think of as chocolate cake soil. It's exactly the sort of stuff that Elliott Coleman, J.M. Fortier, and Ben Hartman have been telling us about for years, and we've generated it here on our own farm with our own resources, and we're really excited about that. I'm excited to share how we do that. This is a little bit about organic matter and sourcing. So a few years ago, I had an opportunity to go visit Elliot Coleman's farm. And one of the things I noticed out there was these mountains of peat. He's near a peat bog, and so he's able to get semi-loads of loose peat delivered to his farm. And that's really a large part of how he builds soil. He adds massive amounts of peat. And I know, from our perspective down here in the Midwest, peat really is not that kind of a resource. It's not local. It's not something we can easily get big semi-loads of. And so I was trying to think, what can I do that sort of mimics that? What resource do we have locally? Because to him, that's a local resource. What resource do we have locally that can be used that way? And as I reflected back on that, I thought about this patch of asparagus we built several years ago. And over the years, in our efforts to kind of smother out the annual and perennial weeds, we had added layer after layer of wood chips, and massive amounts of them. I mean, probably over the years, we'd probably added 3 feet of wood chips. Now it had decomposed, so we really had added probably a foot overall to the bed, but it was a significant amount. And then we had decided that the asparagus just wasn't working because the perennial weeds were taking over. And so we ended up actually tilling that. And when we did, it was this beautiful chocolate cake soil in there. And I realized that's our peat, wood chips. I swear, 20 years from now, people will say, "You mean they used to give that stuff away?" And we'll say, "Yeah, I know, right?" But wood chips are an amazing resource. Now, different varieties of wood chips give you different results, but any wood chip, if you can allow it to sit long enough, turns into beautiful, black, loose soil, every bit as good as anything you'd ever get out of adding peat or any other soil amendment. Makes beautiful black soil. It's just a waiting game, right? There's some things we can do to manage that and improve that, so we try and make sure they stay wet. Like we'll sprinkle our wood chip piles if they get too dry in the summer to keep that decomposition going. We'll turn them every once in a while to kind of encourage airflow through them, and also again, to regulate moisture throughout the pile. But even if you don't do any of those things, even if all you do is collect wood chips, let them pile up in the corner of the property somewhere, in 3 or 4 years, when you tear into those piles, you'll have beautiful black compost in the middle of those beds, middle of those piles, I mean. And so that was inspiration from Coleman to look for that local resource, and for us, wood chips are a big part of that. I hope this has been informative. If you've enjoyed it, subscribe, tell your friends about it, comment below, like the video, and check out our other videos. We've got videos about carrots and potatoes, and we've got a webinar about scaling up. There's a lot of good resources here on this channel, so if it's something you're interested in, let us know. And also, if there's some other topic you'd like to hear more about, let us know about that in the comments as well. Thanks for watching.